I do a lot of my work with the Royal Ballet in London, and where Wayne is a resident choreographer. He also has his own company and works with companies all over the world. I've worked with him now for a period of about 8 years and have done 9 productions in total with Wayne. So I'm now beginning to understand the way he works. And what's very interesting for me as a notator is that working with Wayne brings up a huge number of questions about how to use the notation and how to make it useful. So what I want to do is sort of talk a little bit about the questions that arise and maybe invite all of us to think about possible solutions. For me, the way Wayne works, it's very different to what I would call a traditional choreographer. We don't start at the beginning and go through in a linear way. He creates a huge bank of material and then we'll edit it out. So it's a little bit like making a film. So we'll have hours and hours of footage, basically, and then much of it, maybe 50%, possibly even more, will go completely. So for me, the challenge is how much to write. I'm in the studio with him all day. He works very, very fast. So within an hour's rehearsal, he may produce 2 minutes worth of choreography. And that's quite standard. So it's like and to write that is almost impossible. Because as soon as I look down to write, then I've missed something else. So the challenge for me is to decide what is important. And I think that's a challenge that we all have, always. And so I've found over the years that what I do now much more is I listen absolutely with my ears to what is important to him. So I'm trying to pick out the moments that he is focusing on, and also to capture the shape and the form of what he is doing. So I use video a lot in the rehearsal, I have to. What I'm doing is I'm capturing as much as I can of directions, relationships, travel, and also what he is saying. So my scores are littered with words that he is using. He uses imagery a lot, so there's a lot of throwing and catching and interrelation between people. And I use those words a lot because then for the dancers, that's what will recall the phrase. So I say it's the throwing phrase or it's the catching phrase. And I will be picking out those things. I'm also recording on a small video camera a lot. And then at the end of the day, I will go through and try and pull out the stuff that I think is very important. The problem for me is that very often what he will do is he'll create something different every day for a period of maybe 2 weeks. So we never go back on anything, and then he'll go back and say, now I want to see it. So for the dancers and for me, that's a big challenge. There's no music, so we have no musical structure. So it's not, we can't put the music on and they go, oh yes, it's that phrase. What he will always do is he brings the music in later. He always starts with the movement, completely in isolation. And whilst he's creating the movement, there is music on, but what he says is he charges the space. So the music will depend on his mood. So if he's very agitated, we'll have some kind of punky rock thing. And if he's feeling calm, we'll have some bark or some handle. But it will be very often completely unrelated to the music that we will end up using. Sometimes it is related, but rarely. So I have no idea what we're going to get. I could have a nice little baroque tune, which is always very pleasant. Or sometimes we have music that literally makes me want to jump out of the window with kind of soundtrack. So I have to be very, I have to learn to rise above the music in the studio, because sometimes it's actually not that helpful for me. So for the dancers and myself, in a way, it's very much a team effort. So when we get to the point of him saying, now I want to see what we have, I will have a huge list of the phrases that we have and who did them and on what date. Every single page that I have has a date on it, every single page, because otherwise I lose track of what we did. That's such a small thing, and it's so important. Literally, I don't write anything until I put the date. And what he also does very much is this thing that he calls harvesting. So one person will have a phrase of movement, and he will say to everyone else, I want you to harvest a moment of it, not the whole phrase, but just elements of it, and that they will then shift it and make it into their own phrase. So quite often I'll use, so we will have Ed's phrase, and everybody has their own version of Ed's phrase or Sarah's phrase. And he will also do a thing where he switches gender. So if we have a duet, he will say, okay, I want the women now to do what the man is doing, and the men to do what the woman is doing. Obviously, if there's partnering, they can't do that, so he will say, just make it work. So they will switch over, and they will make it work. Because many people say to me, how on earth do you write it down? That's a very good question. And I think what it is very much with notation, we have to remember it is a language, and it has to adapt, as any language does. And so for me, the challenge and the reward is to allow it to evolve. So there are certain symbols that I will use in my notation all the time, which aren't technically, I'm not sure they're in Liz's directory. So for instance, Wayne is constantly using this rippling through the spine, which if I was to write it down literally, that you're going here, 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 it would take so long, and it is pointless, because I know what it is. It's very much part of his language. So in the end, I have a kind of, I have a little table of symbols that I am using that are shortcuts for his language. And I will use that in conjunction with a video with the iPad. I feel the issue of the iPad in the studio is a tricky one, because personally I hate it. I hate that people are there looking at it. But I think we have to recognise that it's essential. And for me, what I want to do is show that the notation and the iPad can coexist happily. So what I'm trying to do is find a way to pull the information out quickly as we can show it on the iPad. So it's a kind of marriage between the two. And funnily enough, that often means writing less rather than more. It's almost deciding what to leave out. Because what I found with the complexity of Wayne's movement is so great, really, that if I were to write it out fully, it would be almost unreadable. It would take so long to read it back. The moment has passed. So for me, what I'm trying to do is find a way of capturing the essence. It's really about the essence of it. And that will mean there are bits that are left out, and then I will say, this is the movement, this is the shape of it, but now look at this on the iPad and you can see exactly where the body is going. For me, what's very important for my role is that what I'm giving them is the intention. So I could give somebody a video of Wayne's work and say, recreate this, and they would do as good a job as they could, but they wouldn't know that, for instance, that person doing this is actually writing their name on the ceiling. That's what it was. So that's what's important to him, is that it's not just a gesture, it is a very specific move, and it's very specific for intention, so that you're not just shifting around, you're putting your elbow to a corner, you're moving your foot, this way he creates is actually very specific, very specific. So in a way that does make my job easier, because what I'm doing is recording those specifics. So I'll have phrases that we say, oh, it's the 3 points, which started off by saying, you find a corner here, you find a corner here, you put it behind you, you throw it, you catch it, you tie it in a knot, you untie it, you open it out, all those things. So I'm writing not untie, tie, throw to someone else, rather than the actual movement. So it's kind of trying to be adaptable all the time. And what's interesting for me is that it actually really works. It helped the dancers. I'm saying, okay, it's the tying the knot phrase, and they all go, oh yes, I remember that. And so we're doing it in conjunction with one another. The other thing, there are many things that are challenging, the other thing he does, which is very difficult for all of us, is that he then mixes everything up. So he'll say, okay, I want you to start with that 4th phrase, then we're going to do the 1st, then we'll do the 2nd, then we repeat the 4th but backwards, and then we're going to do the 2nd but with everybody doing it in half time or something. So my scores are covered in arrows and coloured pen. I have a huge array of coloured pencils, so that I can say section A, section B, section C. I have sort of endless methods of trying to write it. I have been tempted in the past to actually cut things out, and because it's like that, we get one bit will then become at the beginning, or it will go at the end, and that will shift constantly from day to day. So one day it will be one order, and the next day he'll go, okay, I want a completely different order. And so the hard thing for all of us is to remember which is the most recent order. So sometimes the dancers will come in, they've had 6 rehearsals before of Manon, Sleeping Beauty, Giselle, whatever else, and they come in and they go, what was the last order? And so that's really my role. Where I can be really useful and say, this is the last order, you did this bit, you did that bit, we had that extra bit, then we did that bit backwards. We have literally done things backwards, which is actually incredibly difficult to really do something completely backwards. And in fact, I gave up trying to write it down. I just said, it's backwards. Look at the video. So I think that also one has to be realistic. And there are times when it's, there are only so many hours in the day. And particularly when somebody's creating, Wayne likes to work in quite long chunks. So he may rehearse 4 or 6 hours a day. So that means I might have, up to, I've just got so much material, and I cannot process all of it. So it's about identifying the important things. And I think the relationship between the choreographer and the notator is so important in understanding what their priorities are. And I think that adaptability is something that we all do it automatically, and it's about recognising how useful that is, that sort of being able to shift and think, okay, I'm not even going to worry about that. Because for me, at the beginning, certainly, I had a real sense of panic and thinking, there's no way, there's absolutely no way I can do this. So it's also remembering that everything is a process. For me, what's also very interesting has been the way he structures it. and what that means for reteaching a piece. Many times over my notating sort of life, I've realised that in fact until you reteach a piece, you never know if the score works. You think it does, you think you've written a really good score, and then you go into the studio to reteach it and you think, oh shit, this isn't actually the information I need right now. And that's very much a case of less is more, I've found, is that you can have too much information on the page that makes it difficult to actually see what you want to see. And with things like stage plans, I've quite often, with Wayne's work, I will do individual stage plans, because when I have a huge stage plan with everybody on it for a group section, sometimes in the studio it's very difficult to actually follow where everybody is going, and in fact it's quicker for me to take either each individual or each couple or whatever and say, right, this is your floor pattern, this is where you're going, and then within it identify the moments that they need to be aware that they'll be crossing with other people. For instance, in terms of covering space, he doesn't actually like to fix it too much. So for instance, if people bump into each other in the studio in a big travelling section, my instinct is to leap up and say, no, 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 you've got to wait and you have to go the other way. And he will say to me, no, stop, don't do that, let them sort it out. So he's very keen on allowing the structure to evolve because of the dancer's interpretation of it. So in a way, that's all, I have to remember that, and not fix it too much. So when I'm teaching it, I will say, okay, you're doing this, you're doing that, you will be crossing through each other, you have to make it work. And because that is what he would want all the time. So that risk is part of the choreography. So the use of stage plans is something that is vital for recreating, because he likes big group sections.